would be honored if you would join us.
Greetings and welcome to this week's YouTube episode of Film Stories. In the news this week, an early but significant tidbit dropped from Robocop Returns director Neil Blomkamp regarding his planned return to the Robocop universe. The film itself has been written by the original Robocop screenwriters, Ed Neumeyer and Michael Miner, based loosely on the original sequel that they wrote for the first film. Also, Justin Rhodes, the Terminator Dark Fate writer, is on board. 2. The news in question was that the Robocop character would be wearing the same suit as in the 1987 original. No great surprises there, admittedly, since Blomkamp seems to be taking great pains to talk up and conjure up the feeling of Paul Verhoeven's original cyberpunk classic. He said it's a direct sequel. But if you've been listening to our YouTube episodes here of late, you know that we don't need a world-breaking scoop to send us down a fun film rabbit hole. Scraps of news like this are plenty indeed. So this seems like an ample moment then, talking about the iconic original Robocop suit, to go back down the time tunnel and take a look at the evolution of Robocop's suit, armor, call it what you will, throughout the history of the franchise. The first suit, which was a kind of more grey, metallic colour, was a huge undertaking. Of course, it was the first film. Nothing like this had been done before. And there's an interesting video on YouTube online where Peter Weller talks about the process of donning the suit for the first time and its design. And he talks about how one of the reasons why Orion, the producers and distributors of the original film, were considering pulling the plug on the movie, even though it was a couple of weeks into production. And one of those reasons was because of the suits, and the suit was late. They focused on shooting more of the Murphy scenes in the first couple of weeks, and it just hadn't shown up at that point. And that reminds me of an episode that if you listen for a while to the YouTube episodes, it may remind you too of an episode we talked about when Jean-Claude Van Damme almost played the Predator in the film of the same name. A film which also came out in 1997 and experienced similar problems in creating a look that was viable for its inhuman title character. It worked out differently for Predator in the end. They, of course, went with a completely different suit design after Van Damme refused to wear the original design, which had kind of a strange kind of three-quarter legs. And they redesigned the suit entirely with some help from Stan Winston, the legendary Stan Winston. In the case of Robocop, however, when the suit arrived, there was the same level of concern. It was largely immobile. It didn't have sufficient flexibility in the joints, and never mind the fact that it was taking between 8 and 10 hours to assemble and put on onto Peter Weller. But executives met, the creatives met, and they gave it basically a weekend to try and get it sorted out. Otherwise, there was serious talk about pulling the plug. But some last-minute revisions to the design lightened it, made it more flexible. They cut out a lot of rubber that was impeding the joints, which made convinced Weller and Verhoeven and Orion executives that the film was viable. The suit was viable, and therefore the film was viable. According to Weller, though the interesting thing here, which we'll revisit a little bit later as well, according to Weller, the original plans for the character were for its movements to be much more liquid, almost, he says, like Spider-Man. And that was how he'd been preparing for the role, to create these really quick movements. But when the reality is wearing such a heavy suit of armour, some 65 pounds or so, were weighing upon him, Weller instead had to pretty much rebuild his performance from the ground up again. And he worked with a mime artist, Moni Kim, to reinvent Robocop's movement and articulation pretty much over the course of a weekend. And instead, the performance that we get, rather than something fluid and Spider-Man-esque, liquid, to use his term, we got something much more kind of slow and bulky, but it brought a really visceral presence to Robocop on screen, a weight to his performance, which endures to this day. Screen tests were shot over that weekend break in filming, and creatives, executives alike were impressed, and the rest is movie history. The film went on to be a success and huge acclaim and status that endures to this day. By the time Robocop 2 rolled around, as a sequel was duly put into production, it was no longer Paul Verhoeven at the helm, but Irwin Kershner was directing. Of course, Kershner famous for directing Empire Strikes Back. And he's talked since about toying with the idea actually of completely overhauling the character's look. I got this quote from the Robocop archive. The Robocop suit was almost overhauled in the second picture. Irving Kershner and Rob Bottin actually kicked around the idea of making significant changes to it during pre-production, which I suppose, in terms of storyline, you would talk about being an upgrade to the suit, which would make sense. But however, it was very quickly decided that it would be unwise to change Robocop's look. Bottin apparently remarked, "You can't change the suit. That will be like changing Superman's suit." And it's true to a large degree that the suit was already quickly becoming iconic. So they elected to stick largely with the same design. I mean, the design was the same. However, there were still significant differences. One of them was that this time around the suit was made of fiberglass. It was much lighter that way, as Weller was reportedly unhappy with the idea of having to wear the original cumbersome design again. And this time, though, the suit memorably had this blue sheen to it, because of a new strategy of using paint that would seem more metallic on camera. Also, because of the suit's lightness, Weller himself was less encumbered, and that comes through in his performance in the film. Like it or loathe it, but it's fair to say Robocop in the second movie is a wee bit more spry. So, subtle evolutions, but noticeable ones nonetheless. By the time the third film arrived, none of the original decision makers from the first film were present anymore. Even Weller had now left. He'd opted to make Naked Lunch for David Cronenberg instead. So to cut down on costs, and at this point Orion really did need to cut down on costs because, and Simon has covered this actually in an early podcast on Robocop 3, they were in a clear state of financial uncertainty, and so to draw back cash where they could, they hired a new actor, Robert John Burke, partly because his dimensions meant that they could keep the same suit. They wouldn't have to make a new suit for the new film. And he did fit, mostly. But he did complain that it was uncomfortable because he wasn't exactly the same dimensions as Weller. Close, but not quite. And he found it to be quite an uncomfortable shoot. However, he did get to have a cool jetpack. So, easy come, easy go. Can't complain that much. The general lack of quality of Robocop 3 would end the franchise, even in spite of jetpacks and robot ninjas, two ideas which you'd think would just make it $1 billion film. Until 2014, when the franchise was rebooted by Jose Padilla, taking the design idea that a 2014 version of the future should be aesthetically different to a 1997 view of the future. And so the suit for the 2014 film was significantly redesigned to be sleeker, and I, for one, with the exception of the one little human hand that Robocop keeps in that film, I don't understand that, but with the exception of that, I really like the suit design in 2014's Robocop. The suit itself was 3D printed in that film following computer design, and goes through 3 iterations in the movie. It starts out with a kind of slightly bulkier grey design that pays tribute to the 1987 original, and then it evolves into a really stealthy, dare I say, slinky little black number that did upset some fans. I remember at the time there was some kind of outcry when production stills appeared, because fans saw it, this kind of black, rather kind of slimmed down suit as erring too far away from the original film's design. But I really liked it, and there's some interesting videos on YouTube where you can go back and have a look at how they made it, and clearly there's a lot of love and forethought and intelligence going into the design of the suit. To quote one of the videos I watched, how they had to decide how each part would kind of work in conjunction with others, which parts would separate to allow more movement when needed, which parts would be magnetic, which parts wouldn't. And it works for me. Remember, the film itself doesn't work quite as well as it could, but there's a lot of great ideas in that film. But the suit, both in form and function, is great, and allows, I think importantly, allows Joel Kinnaman, the actor who played Robocop, to move freely, to move slickly, and that in turn allows him to create a Robocop that's all his own. And important, I think, for an actor labouring under the shadow of an iconic character to be able to do that, rather than just kind of turning a parody performance or a shadowed performance of Weller's version of Robocop. Anywho, fans of the original, though, will be happy to know that, although it's only at the scripting stage, when Robocop does finally return under the stewardship of Neil Blomkamp, he'll be sporting the original clunky 1987 look. And that is definitely something to look forward to. We'll catch you next time here for another episode of YouTube episode of Film Stories. If you want more film stories, you can find us on Twitter at Film Stories Pod. You can find us on Facebook at Film Stories Online. You can also find everything to do with film stories, including news of our current Kickstarter campaign to launch Film Stories Junior, a magazine aimed at and written by under 15s. You can find that at the website at filmstories.co.uk. And don't forget, you can find Simon's podcasts at your podcast provider of choice. That's everything from me. Please do like, subscribe, comment which is your favourite Robocop suit. And I'll catch you here next week with another film story. Bye bye.